Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat in the observation deck of the orbital station, staring at the swirling clouds of the planet below, when the alien delegation arrived, and everything in his carefully organized military life went sideways in ways he never imagined possible. The Valerian species had made first contact 6 months ago, and humanity was still figuring out how to navigate diplomatic relations with beings who communicated partially through telepathy, and their representative Lyra stood nearly 7 feet tall with luminescent silver skin that seemed to shift colors with her emotions, and eyes that held depths. Jake found himself getting lost in more often than he wanted to admit. He had been assigned as her human liaison, and over weeks of meetings and cultural exchanges they had developed something he thought was friendship. Though defining relationships across species was complicated, and Jake tried very hard not to think about how her presence made his heart race, or how he found excuses to extend their daily briefings. The problem started during a routine tour of the station hydroponics bay, when Lyra suddenly stopped mid-step and her entire body went rigid, and her skin flashed through a rapid cascade of colors Jake had never seen before, and he immediately moved closer asking if she was all right. But she just stared at him with those impossible eyes and whispered something in her language that his translator failed to process. What Jake did not know was that Valerians could sometimes pick up strong emotional broadcasts from species with latent psionic potential, and his thoughts in that moment had been particularly loud and embarrassingly clear about how beautiful she looked under the grow lights and how much he valued their time together and how he wished circumstances were different. Lyra's people did not date casually, and among Valerians, when someone broadcasted their feelings with that level of intensity and clarity, it was considered a formal declaration of intent and essentially a proposal, and she had accidentally received every bit of it. The situation escalated quickly when Lyra returned to her delegation that evening, because Valerian social protocol required her to report the declaration to her superiors, and suddenly Jake found himself summoned to an emergency meeting with both human and Valerian leadership, while having absolutely no idea what was happening. Commander Lisa Hayes looked like she wanted to crawl under the conference table as the Valerian ambassador explained through translators that Lieutenant Morrison had made a formal bonding declaration to Lyra, and that her people took such matters very seriously and were prepared to begin the traditional evaluation period to determine compatibility. Jake felt the blood drain from his face, and he tried to explain that he had not actually said anything, but the ambassador simply smiled in that enigmatic way of her people, and said that words were often the least important part of communication. Lyra sat across the table, and her skin had settled into a soft rose color that Jake's cultural briefings told him indicated uncertainty, mixed with hope, and she finally spoke directly to him, saying that she had not meant to intrude on his private thoughts, but now that the declaration was public, her people's customs required a response. The human command staff looked between Jake and the aliens with expressions ranging from confusion to barely suppressed panic, because nobody had protocols for accidental telepathic marriage proposals, and Commander Hayes asked if there was a way to politely decline. But the Valerian ambassador explained that rejecting a bonding declaration was considered a grave insult unless there were substantial incompatibility issues. Jake found himself in the surreal position of either going through with some kind of alien courtship ritual or potentially causing an interstellar diplomatic incident, and he looked at Lyra, really looked at her, and realized that the panic he felt was not about being trapped, but about the possibility that his feelings might not be reciprocated. He asked if he could speak with Lyra privately, and after some debate, the various commanders and ambassadors filed out, leaving them alone in the conference room, and the silence stretched between them until Lyra spoke first, saying that she understood human customs were different, and she would help him find a way out of this that would satisfy her people's honor. But Jake surprised himself by asking what she wanted, because in all of this, nobody had actually asked her how she felt about his accidental declaration. And Lyra's skin shifted through several colors before settling on a warm gold that made her almost glow, and she admitted that she had been hoping he felt something for her too, but had not known how to bridge the gap between their species. She explained that Valerians bonded for life in their courtship evaluation period was designed to determine if two beings could truly build a life together, and it involved shared experiences, cultural exchange, and deep emotional honesty, and it was not so different from human dating except more intentional. And with the added complexity of their people watching to ensure compatibility, Jake made a decision that probably violated several regulations and definitely went against his usual careful nature. But he told her he wanted to try, and not because of diplomatic pressure, but because the past months with her had been the best of his assignment and maybe his life, and he wanted to see where this could go. The evaluation period began the next day, and suddenly their scheduled meetings took on new meaning, and they shared meals from both their cultures, and Lyra taught him the basics of Valerian emotional broadcasting, while he introduced her to human music and old movies, and they talked for hours about everything from philosophy to favorite foods, and Jake found himself falling harder with each passing day. The station crew watched with mixed reactions, and some thought it was the most romantic thing they had ever seen, while others worried about the precedent it set. But Jake stopped caring about opinions when Lyra took his hand for the first time, and her skin glowed warm against his, and he felt a faint echo of her emotions in his mind, and knew she felt the same way. There were challenges, of course, and their different biologies meant physical intimacy had to be carefully navigated, and their communication styles sometimes clashed, and the pressure of being the first human Valerian couple meant constant scrutiny from both species. But they worked through each obstacle together. 3 months into the evaluation period, the Valerian Council declared them compatible, and Lyra's people prepared for a bonding ceremony, while human command scrambled to figure out the legal implications, and Jake's parents took a shuttle up from Earth, looking shell-shocked, but trying to be supportive when he introduced them to his 7-foot-tall, silver-skinned almost wife. The ceremony itself was a blend of both cultures, and Jake wore his dress uniform, while Lyra was adorned in traditional Valerian bonding crystals, and when they exchanged vows, Jake opened his mind as much as he could and broadcast his feelings the way he had that first accidental time. Except now it was deliberate and clear, and Lyra's answering emotional surge nearly knocked him off his feet with its intensity. Afterward, at the reception that included both species, Lisa Hayes pulled Jake aside and asked if he had any idea what he had started, and he looked across the room where Lyra was attempting to explain human dancing to bemused Valerian elders, and he smiled, saying he had accidentally started the rest of his life, and he would not change a thing. The story of the human who proposed by thinking too loud became legend among both species and sparked dozens of similar cross-cultural relationships, and Jake Morrison never did figure out if he had started a diplomatic revolution or just gotten incredibly lucky. But as Lyra curled against him that night, her skin glowing soft blue with contentment, he decided it did not really matter, because sometimes the best things in life started with accidents.